If you're not clear on what it is that you're trying to convey, if you can't convey it in a way that allows them to feel that connection and feel like, I want to learn more, if you're not earning the right for them to ask follow up questions, what good is the website? You need to be able to get your messaging right to get the traffic to your website. So for the people that will say, well, I got to save my budget for my website. If a strategy session that costs you a few $1,000s bypasses you spending $12,000 on a website that you could have spent $5,000 on. Let's unpack that. If you go to someone and it's a web designer and they say, okay, well, what do you need with your website? And they know in their head, they have $5,000 as a mark for what they would basically charge for a website. And then they start asking you questions. Well, what kind of website do you need? Are you going to have transactions on it, or is this more of an information brochure type site? How many pages do you need? Who's your audience? What kind of content are you going to need? Do you need copy? Or are you going to be able to provide that? A lot of times what people are running into is you're adding to the process, you're adding to the project so that that web designer doesn't just get to be a web designer. That web developer doesn't just get to be a web developer. Now all of a sudden they have to be a brand designer. They have to be a copywriter. They have to think of all of these things. They have to come up with a strategy to make sure that the story that you want to be able to tell is being conveyed properly for the people that actually do make it to the website, and that they know how to be able to take the next step with working with you. So if you're focusing on being able to find a web designer, you can find a great web designer, but now you're asking them to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. So that web designer or web developer is going to say, okay, well, I would normally charge that person $5,000, but if I'm going to have to come up with copy, strategy, I have to think through their whole business for them. That's where that site goes up to $12,000 or more, because within the time that it takes for them to pull all that information out of you, they could have lost out on other clients. So by going to someone and having your strategy, having your messaging, having your value proposition, having your target audience where you can tell them the story that you want to be able to tell, the narrative that you're trying to convey, when you're able to give them the information that they need, and it's easy peasy, and they're able to go, you know what, I could turn this around really quickly. They don't have to think about charging you $12,000. What they're thinking about is, I can turn this project around really quickly, and I'll have time to get two other clients. So this is where it starts to affect pricing. Same thing with brand logos and any kind of design that comes with marketing materials. When you work with someone and they're a specialist and you ask them to work outside of their specialty, that's where you start to run into issues. Either they need to expand their expertise, or they have to bring somebody else in. If someone is a web designer and they have to bring a strategist in, that strategist is going to charge what they would normally charge. And then that's being added on top of whatever that web design would be. And then that person is also charging a little bit extra because they may have to make sure that they're covering not only the fee for the strategist, but anything extra that they feel like they need to be able to add on. And then again, that still draws out the time it takes to complete that project. So I hope that makes sense. Important to be able to make sure that you pick something that is not only going to work for you and authentic to who you are, but you have a strategy for how you're going to be able to present it to someone. Because a lot of times what happens is people will have an idea in their head and it makes total sense to them. And this is something that I run into with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. They have a business idea and they see it as a business opportunity, but what's missing is the business model and the business plan. What's missing is the strategy on how to be able to take that idea and that opportunity and turn it into something that's not just profitable, where you can make money once or twice, where you can generate a bit of money. But if the industry shifts, if anything changes in your life and things happen, that you're not in a position where you're starting from scratch or you have to figure things out on the fly. Because there are so many businesses that start their business and say, I'll figure it out later. And they say they'll figure it out later for things that are really important. Once you're live, you're live. Once your name is out there, your name is out there. I can tell you from the corporate side, I've known companies, I've worked with companies. I actually worked for a company that had to change their name because the strategy that they had in place wasn't something sustainable. They could get a customer once. They may even get them twice, but they're not going to be able to get those repeat customers. And it's something where when I went in, I was an account manager, and there were people that were great at sales. They were very focused on sales, but what they weren't focused on was client retention. So as a strategist, as a project manager, what I looked at is, where can I bring value? And in this situation, what I realized was, you've got salespeople that can get people to the door. But once you get that sale, if you constantly have churn, this is why you're struggling. What happens to retention? So I put my focus on retention, and I became one of those people that when a client wanted to leave, oh, get Sean, have Sean get on the call because Sean will be able to talk to them and figure out how to be able to get that person to stay. And if I couldn't get them to stay, I could at least change their mindset of I didn't waste my money. And one of the ways that I got to do that was when they were getting on sales calls, I got on a sales call. I listened to what their actual goals were, what they were struggling with, what their challenges were, and then applied that the campaigns and things that we were going to run. The salesperson was just trying to get the budget, but I knew I was going to be the person that had to manage the account. And I don't want to manage an account that I know is doomed because they're not going to remember the salesperson that sold them on it. They're going to remember the account manager. That's the person that's their new point of contact that they talk to all the time. So if someone is being set up to fail, then it was my job to make sure that they didn't fail. And my approach to customer retention was to get out ahead of it. And that's similar to what I'm talking about with entrepreneurship. Get out ahead of the things that could be potential problems, struggles, and challenges. And the way to be able to do that is to have a clear strategy and a clear plan, is to map things out. So when people say, well, I don't know if I need a strategist, that strategy is going to be necessary because if you are live and you are out there and you are building up your reputation and people start to know who you are, and then they pull at the thread of, well, you said this and ask a follow up question that you couldn't answer, that's a credibility issue. If you set expectations and told someone you can deliver on something and then you didn't deliver on it, that's a reputation issue. Once your name's out there and there's enough bad reviews and people that are talking about your business negatively or your brand negatively, those are really hard things to undo. Trust is not something that you get to re-earn easily. It's hard enough to get the first time, but once you break that trust, I'm not going to call it impossible, but you're constantly trying to prove and get back to that starting point, and you never really do. You break trust, that person's always going to have that as a frame of reference. It can't be a 2 for 1. Well, I did one thing wrong, but I did two things good, so you're supposed to let it go. That's not how it works, especially not in business, especially when you have to take into consideration, we don't know what people have to do to make that money. So from a consumer's first standpoint, one of the reasons why I think a strategist is important is you want to be able to make sure that you can answer the first question, the second question, the third question. You can answer the follow-up questions that they may have. A strategy is going to allow you to make sure that they have a good customer experience throughout the whole process. Because sometimes you can have a great product, but if your customer experience is awful, they're not going to get to the point of saying, well, I want to stay. They're starting to question whether it was a good idea to partner with you at all, if it was a good idea to invest with you at all. So it's important to really think through the strategy and make sure that you have something in place that allows you to think through what you want to be able to get done.